Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I am so excited because Eduardo Briceño is on. He is an author of a new book that I have read and loved, and I'm excited for him to share everything he knows with you. It's called The Performance Paradox, and it has shifted some of the ways that I think and the ways that I language things. And some of the ways that I coach, actually. I am hoping that you listening will be able to grab some things for your own coaching and leadership practices as well. So before we jump in, first of all, Eduardo, I wanted to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Becca. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So before we launch into the book, I'd love you to share what has been your journey professionally uh within education and leadership. And I know you've done a ton with growth mindset.
Sure. And it's been all very unexpected. I'm doing things now that I never thought I would be doing. But I grew up in Venezuela. I ended up kind of studying engineering and finance undergrad, and I worked in business and investment banking and venture capital. And after a few years, I felt empty. I felt that I was lacking a sense of purpose, and I actually got physically sick. And I think that was an important part of that, and I wasn't taking care of myself. So I went to grad school in search of something that I really could feel like I was making each day count and I was making a difference in other people's lives. And I was interested in social entrepreneurship. I was exploring lots of different projects, and I was introduced to Carol Dweck. And she was looking for somebody with a business background to bring kind of growth mindset out into the world and into schools. She had recently published her book Mindset. This was in 2007. And so we co-founded an organization, Mindset Works, that I led for 10 years with my partner, Lisa Blackwell. And, Mindset Works serves schools and supports teachers and students with professional development and curriculum around building cultures of learning or growth mindset cultures. And I learned about growth mindset through working with Lisa and Carol, and I realized that I really fell in love with the substance of the work, the psychology and how we learn and how we get better at getting better. And I started, this is one of the unexpected things, like I was encouraged by a board member to start getting out of the office and kind of evangelizing growth mindset. Not just, I grew up as a very, very strong introvert. So I was
Evangelizing.
comfortable in my office, you know, doing my work in my computer.
Mhm.
And she said, like, you're the CEO of the organization. You really have to get out there and spread this message. And so I ended up doing a TEDx talk that Carol was asked to do and she couldn't do, so we decided I would do. And that was a very, very, very far out of my comfort zone, but I worked really hard to do that. And that started spreading, and I started being asked to do more public speaking. So my job became more and more and more public speaking, and surprising to me, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the substance of the work and directly speaking with people and kind of the creativity of generating learning experiences. And so eventually that became my full-time job, and that's what I do now. I do kind of keynotes and workshops around growth mindset, a lot for business leaders because I have a business background, and now businesses are interested in building cultures of learning. But I also, work with school districts and other organizations. And I recently published this book that you mentioned, The Performance Paradox. So that was a new journey too, and something also unexpected, and that, I never thought I would be writing a book, but I'm very proud, and it was a lot of hard work, but very worthwhile.
Yeah. No, I love that. Um, and I do want to mention that you and I know each other because I was contracted by Mindset Works, that was such a beautiful time doing work with Mindset Works because you and I were both in the like den of psychologists and researchers that were part of the work of discovering growth mindset, right? And like we're part of the studies, right? And so it's like you and I were just very close, and you much, closer than I even to like actually what is growth mindset. And those that are regular listeners know I talk about what's not growth mindset and what is. And so I'm really interested in having conversations about authentic growth mindset and not the superficial bulletin boards and coloring pages.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful for that time we shared together. And also, we all bring, you know a ton about growth mindset and have expertise in that, but we all bring different experience and expertise and kind of roles, and it takes everybody, right? It takes everybody doing the work we do to create environments of learning and to support kids and students the best we can. So it's not like it takes all of us, and it takes a diversity of skills and collaboration to really create great learning environments.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Okay, I want to jump into the book. Here's the book. I'm so excited. You can see like my post-it notes here. All right. So the performance paradox. Can you give like a little summary about like, what it covers?
Yeah, so the concept, the performance paradox, is the counterintuitive reality that if you focus only on performing, your performance suffers. And that's, we think that if in order to increase our achievement, we just need to perform more hours, work harder. But actually, there's a lot of research that shows that that's not the case. In order to increase our skills and increase our performance, we have to do something different than perform. And so if you look at, for example, a very skilled person like an athlete, what they do when they're performing in a match is very different than what they do outside of the match when they're focused on improvement. They might, for example, in the match, they might avoid certain moves that are not comfortable for them. But outside of the match, they might exactly be working on those moves. And that's a very different activity. We don't get great at something by doing the thing for many, many hours, but by doing something different than the thing. And
Mhm.
there's research, whether it's, in medicine or in other professions, that shows that experience is different than expertise. So we can have lots of years of experience and not have a ton of skill if we haven't habituated and systematized a way to deliberately improve. And so the performance paradox, the book is the first chapter one is about that issue. And then the
Mhm.
rest of the chapters is about how to overcome the issue. And the way to overcome it is to habituate and systematize the learning zone, because both the performance zone is really important. That's how
Mhm.
we get things done. That's how we contribute. The performance zone
Mhm.
is when we're focused on doing things and getting things accomplished. But the learning zone is critical to improve our skills and to increase our performance. And we can either do one or the other. Like sometimes we
Mhm.
might be focused only on performing, sometimes we might be focused only on improvement. But most of the day, we can actually be doing both at the same time, right? But that's different than just focusing on our to-do list.
Okay, so I want to dive a little deeper into performance zone and learning zone. I love that you brought it right to there because I love that language, and that is language I've started incorporating into my coaching with coaches and leaders. So, can you describe the behaviors? I think one of my favorite things is the focus, kind of main goal of each zone, performance and learning zone, and the associated behaviors of each zone. Can you give the distinction between the two?
Sure. So in the performance zone, our goal is to get things done as best as we know how, trying to minimize mistakes. And in the learning zone, our goal is to improve. And so we
Mhm.
have to go beyond the known or beyond what we have already mastered, which means that we have to expect to not do things perfectly. We have to expect to have errors and to make mistakes along the way. And so we need to be clear about when and how are we going to engage in the learning zone to go beyond the known, right? To leap, right? It requires leaping beyond the known. And so what behaviors that entails, there's lots of different learning strategies that we can use, right? It could be um, asking a question that we don't know the answer to. That's a behavior. That's an example of the learning zone. It can be examining a mistake because when we make a mistake, we don't learn unless we reflect or discuss the mistake. So we don't learn from mistakes, we learn from reflecting on mistakes. We don't learn from experiences, we learn from reflecting on experiences. So that reflection and discussion is an example of a behavior. It might be soliciting feedback is very, very powerful. So if I am a teacher, right, I could, if I have a resource like a peer or a coach that can give me feedback, I can ask that person to go into my room and say, hey, I would love for you to observe me and give me feedback, or you can be more specific. I would love for you to observe me, and I'm having trouble with this particular aspect of what I'm trying to do. I would love your ideas and your feedback. So that soliciting of feedback is an example of a learning zone activity. Experimenting. So, whether you're listening to your podcast, Becca, and getting ideas, you might, a teacher or a coach might think, okay, like here's something I don't do. I might experiment and try that. So let me try it and see what happens. So experimentation is another idea, or another learning zone strategy. Listening to podcasts, reading books, but it all involves leaping beyond the known and changing, because sometimes we like the idea of getting better, but we might be hesitant to change, or change requires effort, and if we don't change, we can't improve. That's why growth mindset is so important. And so those are examples, but they all involve leaping beyond the known.
Hmm. I want to highlight something you said within all this is gold what you just said. You said we don't learn from mistakes. We learn from reflecting on mistakes. So often I'm in schools and then these like, growth mindset bulletin boards and it's like some acronym that it means something. And it has something like, think this, the think this, not this, right? And it's like, I can learn from my mistakes. And I love that. I should take a Sharpie and be like, I learned from reflecting on mistakes, draw a little carrot. Because that's or a little sticky note. Because that is so poignant. I go ahead. Say.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the thing is, if we write or say something like, we learn from mistakes, we might mean, the person writing that or saying it might have in mind, we learn from reflecting on mistakes. But the thing is, sometimes we say that and we think the other person understands what we mean, which is we learn
Mm,
from reflecting on mistakes, but they might not, right? They might not know that you need to reflect in order to learn from mistakes. And
mm,
so in order to lead and to teach, often we need to make the implicit explicit. Like in my mind, I might have an implicit understanding that reflection is critical. But if I don't make that explicit to other people, then there's confusion and different understanding on the words.
yes. And you followed up with we learn from reflecting on mistakes, we learn from reflecting on experiences. And how important is it that the coaches and leaders listening here to take time for reflection? It doesn't matter if a teacher is practicing the thing that you're asking them to practice. Um, they have to reflect on it, right? To evaluate how did I do? What worked? What didn't work? What am I going to do different next time?
Yeah, and that's part of the value of coaching, right? You're creating a structure for the teacher to reflect with somebody else, which is super valuable, but
Mhm.
the reflection is necessary. And then ideally, as coaches, we help them also get into the habit of reflection on their own too, so that they have us as a resource, but they can also reflect on their own as well.
Exactly. Okay, so that is the learning zone. And I love how you created the learning zone. What is the performance zone?
The performance zone is when we are trying to do things as best as we know how, trying to accomplish something, trying to um, do something as best as we can. And a great performance involves few or little mistakes. So
Hmm.
when the stakes are high, and we want to, there are times where we want to just try to minimize mistakes and try to get as high a performance as possible. So a high stakes exam, for example, might be something where a student, it might be reasonable, it would be appropriate for them to get into their performance zone, right? Here's, is the SAT, is high stakes. The effect of this is going to have a big impact on me. So my goal for this hour or 2 hours that I'm going to be taking this test is only one goal, is to
Hmm.
try to get as high a score as possible, right? So then what strategies might I use then? I might skip questions that I'm not sure about, do the questions that I know best first, and then go back to the other questions, right? If I finish the exam early, I might review the questions, and so you're focused only on trying to get things right. And of course, we're all human. We make mistakes even in the performance zone. So after a performance, we can go back and think about what went well, but what didn't go well, what can I do differently going forward? So we can alternate after the performance zone. We can go back into our learning zone and reflect on our performance so that we can improve for the next performance. But the issue in our work and lives and in school is that we are often too much in the performance zone, right? So if we are grading and putting a letter and a number on all student work, it sends a message that school is a performance zone. It's a place to show what you know rather than to work on what you don't know and get confused and ask questions and grapple with something that you can't do yet. And so we need to be clear, I think, about most of the time we're in the learning zone. If we are getting 100, we're working on the wrong thing. We need to increase the level of challenge. And then there are times to show and to make sure that we have learned what we think we've learned. And so those are the summative assessments. And there's a time for the performance zone, but most of the time on school should be in the learning zone for
I
students.
agree. Yes, yes. And for teachers,
And for teachers,
right?
absolutely. So for teachers, the same thing, right? It's like in all professions, we tend to spend too much time in the performance zone, and that includes teachers. And the stakes are high, right? Because we want to do what's best for kids. But the thing is that if we're only always doing what we think works best and we're not being deliberate about how to continue to get better, then we stagnate and our kids suffer. So that's the paradox, right? So we have to, whether it is PLCs or continuing to go to PDs or working with a coach, experimenting, um, we have to figure out how do we, yes, continue to teach and do a good job, but at the same time continue to get better.
So I'm thinking about the folks listening to this podcast, and a lot of them work directly with teachers. Um, and I imagine a lot of them do classroom observations, go in, right, to watch a lesson, and reflect with a teacher. I'm curious. I have my own thoughts about this, but I'm curious, do you if you were a coach, right, you went and you were regularly observing teachers, how would you presence that we are in the learning zone? What would you say to someone to let them know we're in the learning zone? I don't want a dog and pony show.
Right. Great question. I would love your thoughts too, for sure. But what comes to my mind is it's really important to set the stage and to get on the same page, right? To frame what is it that we're going to be doing while I'm going into your classroom and observing, and why am I here, and how can we best use this time? If we're not, if we don't make our implicit assumptions about what time that time is explicit so that we get in the same page, then the teacher might have a different idea of why we're there. And so they might get into their performance zone and get into a dog and pony show, like you're saying. And so, and there are times where people go into teachers' classrooms to evaluate, right? And it
Mhm,
has high stakes for them,
mhm, mhm,
consequences. And at that time, the teacher should be in their performance zone. Like if they're being evaluated, anytime that whether it's a student or teacher is being evaluated, they're gonna go into their performance zone if there's high stakes. And so we need to be clear about, okay, when is it that somebody's coming into your classroom to evaluate you? And when is it that somebody's coming into your classroom to support you to continue to improve, like everybody can? Even the best teachers work to continue to improve.
mhm,
And so this time I'm a coach. I am here to support you and to help you continue to reflect and to continue to get better and to continue to better serve your students. And so what I would love for you to do is to work on things that you're not sure about. And so that then we can think about them and talk about them later and maybe experiment with something else the next time. So if you're not sure, like use this time to take risks and to try new things. And then this is a time where you have a coach in the room observing, and that way we can brainstorm and think together later, as opposed to doing something that you already know how to do well. And then that's great, but I'm not going to be that useful in providing ideas and continuing to evolve your practice. And so what do you think about, but also, as a coach, it's like, is not just me saying those things as is the truth
mhm,
and you just listen, right? But it's like, here's my idea of what this time is. What do you think? Do you have any concerns? Are we in the same
mhm.
page? So you're giving people the opportunity also to express, yeah, that all sounds nice, but in reality, here are my concerns with that approach. Is it not true that, I might get fired or that whatever? And so you get into a conversation to actually get on the same page and create what's called psychological safety, which is when
Mhm.
people feel free to take risks. They feel safe to take risks, but also not just safe but encouraged, right? Like we want to be taking risks together and to be working to deliver improve. But I would love your thoughts on the topic, Becca.
Okay, before I share my thoughts, I want to touch on psychological safety. I love psychological safety. Well, I mean the concept, but Amy Edmondson, who is I'm like a fangirl of hers, who seems to be the biggest name. I'm sure she's not the only researcher in psychological safety, but naming Jen Machin and I, and who's also a colleague of yours in Mindset Works, we were talking about recently growth mindset. Operating under growth mindset actually requires some vulnerability, right? You can't be operating under a growth mindset with someone and not have vulnerable. They don't. They have to go together, right? And so if I'm showing up vulnerably, right, and doing like the messy risk taking thing, the person I'm working with has to provide psychological safety or intellectual safety, right? The idea like it is safe for me to mess up, criticize, question, and I won't be blamed, shamed, embarrassed, right? So I wanted to like presence that around psychological safety and not let that moment go by. Okay. So what are my thoughts? This is my thoughts around I would sit down if I was coaching a teacher. I would sit down and especially if I was shifting, intentionally shifting towards, learning zone coaching, right? And I would say, well, I would have a pre-conference and I would say, "Hey, I'm coming in Tuesday, 8:30, can't wait. What are some things that you are working on that you want me to watch out for? How do you want to improve?" And I think it's similar to what you said, but really like you tell me what to look for that you're working on, right? And it's I have said that to teachers before. And it's funny, about a third of them tend to be like really excellent at it. And so it takes me coming back and say, "Hey, seems like you're really good at that." Or you've been working on it and you did a great job, great job. Next time I come in, what's a new thing you're working on? Because when we shift, if we've mainly been in performance zone and my relationship with the teachers I'm coming in to observe and the expectation is that it goes well, um, it's gonna take, I would assume a few times for our brains to assess, is this safe for me to mess up? Right? So it's just being willing to go back over and over again and be patient with saying, "Hey, we're actually in the learning zone right now and it is totally safe and I want you to be growing." Right? And I'm committed to your growth and not perfection in these times.
Absolutely. I totally love that. I agree with that. Um, and maybe, building on it, I love the question of like, what are you working on? Having, that's coaching, right? You're helping the person become a self-directed learner, and you're providing scaffolds for them to build those thinking habits and other habits. And then maybe if they struggle with that question, like
Mm.
maybe, shifting, like maybe, hey, what challenges are you seeing in your students? What different outcomes would you like to achieve? And with, and so, okay, what could we try to achieve those outcomes? So you can ask different questions to try to
Mm.
get to that challenge and that unknown, and what are we going to try differently to try to continue to improve. And to your point, psychological safety is built um, over time.
Mhm.
It is a property of, um, as Amy Edmondson has discovered, it's a property of teams, right? Not of an organization. You want to build organizations that have a lot of psychological safety. But in organizations, usually the level of psychological safety varies by team, because it's about relationships, about the people you work with closely, the people you know, the people you collaborate with, and what is your understanding with those people. And so, to your point, if I'm your coach, between the two of us, we can create safety, even if the teacher doesn't feel safe with other people or other people in the organization, or structures in the organization. And at the beginning, it always takes vulnerability, and I agree with you completely. But we can also get to a point where we can be transparent without feeling as vulnerable. Because I
Mhm.
understand that if I take a risk, or if I talk about what I'm unsure about, or I show something that I feel I'm not great at, I'm not going to be punished, but rather you're going to be admiring that I'm
Mhm.
doing that, and you're going to
Mhm.
providing support to me, and you're going to be doing the same thing. And so now I can be transparent and be just honest with you and not feel vulnerable in the sense of not feel open to harm, but still be very transparent. And by the way, ideally, like in the most psychological safe and strongest learning zone environment, I could even be doing that visibly and explicitly in front of my students, right? So that
Mhm.
I'm reflecting on what I am working to improve and how that's going and the insights that I'm gaining. And I'm modeling being a lifelong learner in front of the students, because students often take, they perceive us adults as know-it-alls, right? Like
Mhm.
we have the final word and we are sure, and if you disagree with me, you are wrong. And that's not modeling lifelong learning. And so if we want them to become lifelong learning, we have to show the way, and that means making our learning process visible and explicit to them.
Mhm. Mhm. Public reflection. That's I think that's the academic term. It's been a few years. But yeah, public reflection. Like I am in this moment sharing with you out loud. And that I actually really love how you said, the goal actually is that we're operating under a growth mindset, that we have enough psychological safety that we it doesn't feel vulnerable anymore. That's the goal. That's really great. Thank you. You're shifting
Yeah,
my thinking.
yeah. So we whether or not it feels vulnerable, we want to be transparent, right? And at the
Mhm.
beginning, because don't
Mhm.
have a strong relationship with a person, we're going to feel vulnerable. And we might still continue to feel vulnerable for a long time, but we might not. But the
Mhm.
important thing is to be honest with ourselves and with others about what we're thinking and feeling, so that we can learn and perform better together.
Mhm. I love that. This is really great. Another part of your book that I loved was your growth mindset myths. How I would love to I would actually kind of love to just read them. I don't often do this, but I would love the listeners to at least hear these myths. They're one sentence each. And I would love to hear, how did you uh create them? How did you not create them? Sorry. How did you identify these myths? Like what experiences did you have that caused you to be like, I need to name the myths? What do we want to do first? Should I read them first?
It's up to you.
Okay. Oh gosh, I have to find them. That's funny. I didn't mark them. Give me a moment here
Yeah.
to
So
find them.
when you said you wanted to talk about that, I went to that page, just page 99.
Oh, thank you.
This is the first one. And the first one,
Uh,
while you get there, so misconception number one, or myth number one, is a growth mindset is the same as positive thinking, working hard, or persevering, and it magically fosters growth. That's the misconception. Reality number one is a growth mindset is the belief that our abilities and qualities can change if we engage in the learning zone. So growth, anytime we learn something, or anytime we're exposed to a new idea that is different from the way we think, we can either distort the idea to make it fit our existing mental models, or we can change our mental models based on new information. And we do so one or the other, or a combination of the two. And growth mindset is really easy to distort the idea to make it fit our mental models, because it is tied to so many different behaviors, and some of those behaviors are things that most people will agree with. So for example, when somebody learns about growth mindset, they might say, "Oh yeah, I believe that high expectations is really important, and growth mindset is about high expectations. We need to be in a growth mindset." And so then they might redefine growth mindset to mean it means high expectations, or growth mindset means working hard, or growth mindset means persevering. And all those things are good things, but or even, positive thinking, but a growth mindset is not those things. A growth mindset is the belief that people can change, that our abilities or our qualities can change, that we can develop them. And and it's important because all the research has been based on that. And what the research shows is that this belief that we can change is necessary but not sufficient for behaviors like perseverance, or hard work, or high expectations. And sometimes, I hear people say, well, I know people can't get smarter, but I believe in hard work and that's what matters, for example. No, actually, if you believe that people can't get smarter, that's a called a fixed mindset, and there's consequences to that belief. And so, yeah, it's important to get clear on what growth mindset is because it has different implications.
This is so great. And I realized I was calling them myths and they're misconceptions.
Oh, myth. I actually had myth. Myth is a equally appropriate word.
Equal accurate. Okay, great, great, great. Um, let's see. Gosh, I think there's six of them, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what's one other favorite misconception that you love sharing that you think makes a really big difference and would make a really big difference for coaches and leaders to hear?
Well, one is that growth mindset also has been kind of distorted to mean that the students, the kids need to have a growth mindset, and that's what the growth mindset work is about. It's about, if a student is struggling, their problem is their mindset, and we just need to put them in a growth mindset, or you know, it, it, and so the students need great instruction, right? And they need an environment where adults, we are working to grow ourselves and to better support students and to better teach students. And so we need to be in a growth mindset about ourselves and think about, okay, if a student is struggling, or even if they're doing well, like how can I continue to get better to better support that student and help them grow? Um, and also, it, a growth mindset is not a silver bullet. So it's necessary but not sufficient. In addition to believing that we can improve, like a student might needs to believe that they can improve and they can become smarter, but they also need to understand how to improve, right? And so an example of how to improve is founded on the distinction between the learning zone and the performance zone. But things like the power of reflection, right? The power of working on things that we don't know and grappling with confusion and asking questions. All those are strategies on how to learn, which is also really important. So we need to, in school, there's a lot of standards that are content standards, like you need to learn these skills, and that's great. But in the standards, often you don't have learning strategies, right? So it's not explicit that we need to be teaching kids how to learn and how to become lifelong learners. And I think that's really, really important work that we need to do in schools, helping them learn that they can improve, but also how to improve throughout their lives.
I'm going to add one more thing. So, you know, showing them why they're learning it, right? Actually having buy-in, right? Like, what's the relevance of me learning this?
Yes.
This sounds nuts. Like, yeah, I believe I can do it. You showed me how, but why would I be learning how to skateboard?
Yes.
It's not relevant for me. And I think it is actively detrimental to be teaching growth mindset in an isolated way without acknowledging the other factors needed for a human to shift the way they are thinking and get unstuck, whether we're talking about children or adults. If we are just hammering growth mindset without acknowledging psychological safety, relevance, right? I think we're doing harm.
Absolutely, completely agree. So, as you know, one of the frameworks that I share in the book, I call it the cornerstones of change. And in order to become motivated and effective learners, we need to understand that we can change. That's a growth mindset. We need to understand how to change and how to learn and build those habits. That's the learning zone, the performance zone. Number three, we need to have a why to your purpose, to your point, right? We need a purpose. And then number four, so that's as an individual. But then number four, we also need to believe that we belong in a learning community, that the people around us, we belong, we're welcome, we're part of that community. That community is our home, but also the people in that community are learners, and they're visible learners with each other. So we are sharing with each other what we're working to improve. We're soliciting feedback. We're debriefing together. And when those four conditions are there, then that's when we get the greatest learning.
Something when you were CEO of Mindset Works, something you did that I loved and always stayed with me was we would after you would do a speech or professional development and other team members were there with you on the call with the whole staff, you would say, "I'd love feedback." Who those of you that were there, um, I'd love feedback on how I did, and you would get, like, public feedback on how you did, right? You're the CEO, and you're asking for public feedback, and I was like, I've never seen any leader do that, and, I I just thought, like, you were absolutely living your own growth mindset.
Well, you know, as leaders, people are looking to us as to what's valued in the
Mhm,
organization. And so if we value learning and improvement, and we believe everybody can continue to improve, which is what a growth mindset means, you know, we need to behave like that. And plus, the benefit of that is that I learn more and I grow more. And you know, I actually do that in often in keynotes when I'm, you know, I'm speaking with people that I don't know. At the end, when I'm doing live polling, if we have time at the end, I ask two questions for feedback, and so we see that we see the live polls right there in terms of how the session went and how I can improve. And I'm making I'm learning, but B, I'm making soliciting feedback
mhm,
normalized, right? I
mhm,
make it something that is easy to do, it can be quick, and it can be so valuable. Um, and there's something that is kind of that I talk in the book is called um, the um, the flywheel of competence, which is that those things are easier to do when we feel competent, right? When we feel like we do a good job at things, it is easier to solicit feedback because people will like be able to say, I appreciated this thing that you did that worked well, and here's how you can improve. When we are less confident, when we're just started, we feel like we're not good at what we do, then it might feel more risky and more vulnerable to ask for feedback. There might be a lot of negative things that people might say, and that's a paradox, right? It is harder to get started into those habits because we don't have the confidence, but those are the strategies that enable us to get better. And then once we get better, then it's easier to take on those behaviors to continue to get even better, right? And
mhm,
so it's hard to start the wheel turning, but once you start building these habits, it's easier and easier to continue turning the wheel and to continue doing it more publicly and with more brains around you. And that just keeps the wheel turning faster and faster.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and something Brene Brown says is your daring leadership requires vulnerability, right? And to that's where the vulnerability comes in. Something as you were talking, it really occurred to me when you were asking for feedback, it for me it felt like we're all on the same team. Like even though positionally, right, you had positional power, it felt like, oh, he's on the same team as me, right? And there was no us versus them. Where if we are working in schools and there's an us versus them context, right? The leadership versus the teachers, or that. And I've been in schools where this exists, right? Public feedback would feel very threatening, right? So to address, even if there's a context where it's kind of us versus them, to address that first to make it psychologically safe. To For leaders and coaches, you go first. You ask for feedback first, right? To model that learning zone right there. It's worth the work.
Yeah, and it's like to your point, it's so important for the leader or the person in power to go first to make it safer for others to engage. But
Mhm,
also, I think it creates that feeling of we, of us being in the
mhm,
same team, the same in group, because part of like the main job for me as a leader is to support, you know, the people in the organization so that they can do their job and we can have the impact that we want. And so the greatest impact that I need as a leader is the greatest feedback that I need as a leader is the feedback of the people that I'm trying to support, right? The people who work at the organization. And so when you're genuinely interested in what can I do better to better support you, and let's have that conversation, then I hope that that helps people feel like, oh, okay, we're in the same team. And if I'm having an issue, I can speak up so that we can get better together.
mhm. I agree. Well, this has time has flown. And this has been such an incredible conversation. I highly recommend everyone listening to this to read Performance Paradox. I will put a link to purchasing the book in the show notes. So, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. If those listening would like to contact you, where can they find you?
Sure. My website is briceño.com. It's my last name, Briceno. Have a monthly newsletter there. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, and other social media. So happy to, and my email is eduardo@briceño.com. Happy to connect with anybody.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becca. Great to see you. And thanks for the
You
important
too.
work.
Yeah, thanks.